Clouds are poorly understood but play a major role in regulating global temperature. In fact, Dr. Roy Spencer out of the University of Alabama, Huntsville, says that a 1 to 2% change in the amount of cloud cover on the Earth can explain all the warming of the last 150 years. Now, cirrus clouds, these high, thin ice crystal clouds, 20 to 25,000 feet up, generally act as warmers to the climate. They trap heat trying to go to space. But the low clouds do the opposite. Low clouds act as coolers because they reflect the sun's light and they let the heat from the ocean or the earth go right through them to space. And then you've got the clouds in between that do both. So clouds are very complicated, and the computer models do not know how to handle them. We don't know how to model all these conflicting different cloud types. Now, man-made global warming theory says there should be a strong warming of the upper troposphere 2 to 3 times that of the surface temperature, meaning that between about 25 and, let's say, 60,000 feet, there should be this, a dramatic warming of the upper atmosphere, 2 to 3 times the surface rate. That is above the equator between 30 north and 30 south. This is the global warming fingerprint, or the DNA, if you like. Well, since 1958, we've been launching weather balloons and recording the temperature from the surface up to about 100,000 feet. And this is what they show for the trend. Basically, nothing. Nothing. So, this is what the computer models say should be happening. This is what the observations show. Observations always trump computer models. So there's no match of the fingerprints. So the global warming fingerprint is not there. Here's another example. Computer models predicting these hot spots above the tropics, up 25 to 60,000 feet. But the weather balloon measurements show the temperature in those regions has actually been declining, not increasing. Warming per decade measured and predicted. Measured by our balloons, predicted by the computer models. And that's at 30,000 feet. At 39,000 feet, the warming is 105% above what's been measured. A lot. Now, the Earth's temperature, as I said, has increased 1.1 degree Fahrenheit in the last 160 years. So by 2100, at current rate, we'll be half a degree Fahrenheit warmer. The IPCC says 7 degrees. The climate models are greatly exaggerating the climate system's sensitivity to carbon dioxide. That's why they're producing so much warming. Now, computer models are used as evidence of man-made global warming. They are not evidence. Real evidence is solid. It does not change. Models can be changed to give a desired result. Now, here's a quote by David Frame, a climate modeler from Oxford University, and this is very revealing. Rather than seeing models as describing literal truth, we ought to see them as convenient fictions, which try to provide something useful. Well, then that's a convenient fiction. It certainly sells something. Now, global warming isn't talked about so much anymore. Now it's climate change. We've got a change in the wind because nature is not cooperating with the theory. Stop global warming being buried in snow. Record snowfall at Windsor Locks this past January with 24 inches in 24 hours. Record cold waves. China just had its second coldest January since 1961. Now, this is the longest running temperature record in the world. It's from central England, and this is the temperature in Celsius. So that's 32 degrees, 0. And these are the Decembers. And this goes back to 1659. I wish we had this kind of record all over the world. It would be so helpful, but we don't. But anyway, these are the Decembers, and what do you find? 2010, December 2010 was the second coldest in 351 years of record. Only 1890 was slightly cooler. So what does that tell you? It tells you the variety of weather is enormous. See, what happens is a lot of times people confuse climate and weather. The weather is what happens every day, all over the place, up and down. You know what the record high temperature today is? 85. The record low is 11. So, the range of weather is enormous. Climate is just the average of all that. So, people have said, well, I know, let's call it climate change instead, because the climate is not warming like we said it would be. Man-made climate changes causes the following: very warm weather and very cold weather. Weather. Falling autumn leaves. Falling presidential approval ratings. Warming on Mars. Squirrel attacks. Falling TV ratings and just plain falling. All caused by global warming. So climate change now is an all-encompassing phrase that covers everything. So any big hurricane, any large tornado outbreak, any flood, heat wave or drought, heat wave, record cold, or record snow is now all covered by climate change. Some people even had the audacity to say that climate change caused the tsunami, earthquake and tsunami in Japan, which is absolutely despicable. So let's look at carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is a very small part of the atmosphere. It's 3.81 of a percent. It's a tiny little number. It's one of the greenhouse gases, along with water vapor, methane, and nitrous oxide. Water vapor is very interesting. It's the gas that varies the most in the atmosphere, and when it's really cold, there's hardly any water vapor in the air, and when it's really warm in the tropics, it's like 4% of the atmosphere. So I took 2%. There's much more water vapor in the air than carbon dioxide, ranging from near 0% at the poles, or I should say 0 at the poles, to as much as 100 times more in the tropics. Moisture in the air is 75 to 90% of the greenhouse effect. This is the water vapor, and if you count clouds, it's 90% of the whole greenhouse effect. Now here is the amount of carbon dioxide in the air since 1750. This is from the ice cores, and this is our measurements since 1958. 390 parts per million. Carbon dioxide was as high as 3,000 parts per million when the dinosaurs were around, yet there was no runaway greenhouse effect. Earth never became Venus. I hear some people saying now that carbon dioxide is pollution and will cause people to have more asthma attacks in the future. This is ridiculous. We hear that we are dumping massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, poisoning the atmosphere. This is the percent of the atmosphere increase since 1700. The percent of the atmosphere. All right, what is it? Is it 10%, 1%, or 1/100th of a percent increase? Any guesses as to what it might be? The real number is 1/100th of a percent increase since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That's what all the screaming's about. A 1/100th of a percent increase. If fossil fuel use equals 50% of that increase, we have increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by 5/1000th of a percent. 5/1000th. This is the percent increase of carbon dioxide since 1958. Can you see it on the graph? It's that. Right there. That's the increase as a percent of the atmosphere since 1958. Looks alarming, doesn't it? But there's been cooling and warming and cooling periods during this time. Now, carbon dioxide, as I said, is growing 2 parts per million per year, or 0.5% a year. From 1945 to 1976, carbon dioxide increased 7%. But there was no warming. From 1945 to 1976, the temperature fell and then leveled off for 25 years. So even though carbon dioxide increased 7% at this time, there was no warming. Carbon dioxide went up 9% from 1977 to 1998, and there was warming in this period. Carbon dioxide has gone up 110 parts per million since 1850. 23% of that rise has been since 1998, but there's been no warming. So the relationship between temperature and carbon dioxide is extremely weak. If the warming of the 80s and 90s had continued, this would be the trend. But obviously it is not.